The hills appear to float in a bluish haze, the trees a palette of greens in the summer, the vista stretching to the horizon over the valleys and ridges, a scene beckoning to be painted. And paint artists did, and still do today. Brown County, whose picturesque scenery was carved from the last, deepest entrenchment of the final ice age, has drawn artists since the first horse and buggy ventured along dirt roads carrying an artist and the easel. Not only artists coveted the scenery, so did the earliest settlers not long after Colonel Jacob Brown lent his name to the south central area in the middle of Indiana, whose statehood began in 1816. In the summer of 1908, a group of artists relaxing after dinner on the wide porch and lawn of the Pittman Inn, a temporary residence for them, were talking about the beauty of the landscapes appearing on the ever-increasing number of canvases. "It should be Peaceful Valley," one of them exclaimed.
I've done an awful lot of paintings of the pond, of the water lilies, and just, the village itself of Nashville. So it's one of the reasons I moved here. There's enough things to paint here that I don't have to worry about, it's only this or this to paint. And you discover things too all the time.
Tim Greatbatch and wife Lisa live in the Brown County woods, replete with a studio, pond, and flower and herb gardens. Tim has only to step out his door to find scenes to put on his canvases. Tim, who has been painting Brown County for 20 years, is the first artist whose landscape of Lake Ogle in Brown County State Park was chosen in 2006 to be the first entry of an ongoing permanent collection for Indiana Heritage Arts, a nonprofit based in Nashville, Indiana. IHA was founded 42 years ago with a mission to preserve the great painting tradition of the Brown County art colony begun in the late 1800s.
When I was very young, say about 5, 6, 7 years old, everyone thought I was going to art school. And then by the time I was maybe about 14, there was no question I was going to be going to a music conservatory. My music was contemporary, probably more contemporary than most of the art I create. I worked as a composer out of Philadelphia for about 15, 20 years. My painting was always still part of what I was doing. It was just way in the background. I spoke to a woman. She's in Philadelphia that was very high up. She was a person that was in charge of purchasing paintings for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She said, well, when you paint, she looked at my surreal paintings and thought they were very interesting. She said, when you go into a gallery or when you go into a museum, what section do you look at first? And I said, well, I almost always go to the Impressionist and early Post-Impressionist. That sort of fascinates me. I love the texture. I love the color, how different it was from just a generation before. She said, well, maybe you ought to try that. It is scary when you have success in one thing to abandon it, so to speak, to try something else. But on the other hand, you get then the chance to actually have two lives. And I had to find a way to make some money. So I opened up what I thought, what could help me as a painter and I could make money at it, and that was decorative painting. And so I did a business where I did, ceiling paintings in huge mansions or Italian restaurants that wanted faux Italian tiles all over the wall or Etruscan panels as if they'd been pulled out of walls from that period of time. So it gave me a chance to kind of explore art history as well as work really big. And I say big is important because when you're working like 4 by 8 feet or 15 by 20 feet, you have to make certain decisions, and if you're doing them in a place of business or in somebody's home, you can't just be there for like 6 months. So it kind of taught me in a very quick, hard way how to get a lot of bang and impact in a short period of time. So I was kind of having my own art history, art training, but I was being paid at the same time to do it, and it became successful enough that I can even hire people sometimes to help me on bigger jobs. So that gave us some income, and also at that time, then it gave me a little time to start going back and working on impressionistic landscapes on canvas, 20 by 24s or whatever. And I think then is when we began to look, where do we want to live that we can find a market for my painting? So that's when we began, as I mentioned earlier, looking to the areas that we looked at and then settling in Brown County.
Tim's painting, Afternoon at Lake Ogle, is painted with acrylics and is 24 by 36 inches. This is the first of 19 paintings of the permanent collection of Indiana Heritage Arts on view in 3 public buildings.
Brown County State Park has 2 man-made lakes, and Ogle Lake is the larger of the 2. There's a loop hiking trail about 1.5 miles long that moves around the lake. And since I live here in Brown County, it's a place that I go to and paint often. In fact, over the years, I've probably painted, 4 or 5 dozen paintings of Ogle Lake. This particular painting, it takes place in the summer, and it's an afternoon scene, which is a little different. And most of the time in the summer, as a painter, you tend to pick times that are either early morning or very late afternoon to early evening, or even sunset, because of the shadows. But because it's a densely wooded area, and because the trail meanders up and down around the lake itself, this worked out to be, I tried to find the original sketch, which I usually had notated at the time, roughly, and I could not do that, but I'm guessing it was probably somewhere around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And what you can see is the sunlight is coming from the right across the painting, casting shadows running from right to left. So it's a bright summer day, even though we're in a wooded area, so there's still lots of shadows. And I'm actually looking at the across. I'm looking in effect south, because the sun's going to be over here to the right, to the west, across the lake. And what fascinated me about the scene was not so much the lake or anything, but rather these kind of sentinel trees, these pillars that columns of trees that break up the painting from all of its horizontal sense, because the shadows are creating horizontal, and the sense of the light is moving across the canvas more than anything else. And you're also kind of looking at the lake, not directly at the lake, but kind of looking, I think the viewer kind of is pulled to look across the painting this way towards the lake because of the shadows. You're seeing a trail with those lighter colors in the foreground, and that's probably what's leading your eye to say what's around the next bend, next corner. I'm looking much more, not so much about the narrative of the painting, what it might conjure up for the viewer, but much more about how I can make the color and the light and the composition work as a uniform or organic kind of piece of art. And if that happens, then I think a lot of those things that people superimpose over art, whether it's painting or, just like when somebody says, this music makes me feel like such and such. Well, the composer, wasn't necessarily trying to evoke that from the person, but if he or she really knows what they're doing and makes their ideas clear, then that allows the viewer to go off, and it's kind of what makes art with a capital A, all arts, kind of such a special thing, is that it allows you to interject your own personal thoughts and feelings into whatever you're viewing or listening to. So when you're doing something that's representational, that is to say something that looks like something that you know or see or can be aware of, The underlying structure becomes most important. And I've sometimes asked people, well, why did you decide to paint it this way? In other words, I could have made it a real tall painting, kind of a narrow width but tall height painting, or vertical, if you will. And so why is it so horizontal? Well, when I saw the scene, its first strength to me as a composition, and I sort of see this before when I'm sketching or photographing to begin with, is what I call kind of the anatomy or the underpinning of any kind of scene. Every single painting in here we could analyze that way and get some sense. I've created what I saw as 4 distinct wedges or diagonal shapes that are created by this scene. Number 1 is the sky, up, the uppermost part, followed by the opposite shoreline, followed by the water, and finally the trail part that we were just discussing, or the ground that I'm standing on, that part of the shoreline, of which is the reference point for everything. So if you, for the moment, can subtract these vertical structures, the trees, you see these 4 wedges, and they're very much a very light color to a kind of a medium color to the kind of diffuse color of the water, and finally the more interesting part, the shadows breaking up, which in themselves create little wedges. There's still a 5th wedge in this, which is right here, this little tiny wedge, which is the dam itself. In addition to the 4 wedges here, I have broken up the painting's structure from a horizontal sense by these strong vertical sense. And the diagram here, you see no leaves on the tree. The leaves are not important to the anatomy of the painting. That's the fluff and the detail and what captures the light and what turns it alive. But from a drawing standpoint, it's the position of the trees. You have a strong foreground tree where you see the branches that are kind of bowing out and spreading out as they would. And most of the other tree structures you see very, very little branch work on, because they're hidden through all the leafage, all the foliage itself. So what was important to me in the sketch was to try to get some of the branches shaped correctly as they were, and had the strong tree, closest. It's bigger, its trunk is thicker, obviously, because it's closer, but it was one of the larger trees. Some of these smaller trees that are towards the shoreline were smaller for real, even though they're further away. So those are kind of the base elements to the painting that underpin it, and see, even with just this, you see there's a lot to the design, even in a relatively seemingly simple canvas. There's a lot going on that's allowing the eye to move both this way all the time, but also this way. And if you can keep the eye moving around the canvas, the person will enjoy the canvas more. If it becomes static, if everything, the painting kind of stops, then they move on to the next painting. So now that we have the basic structure set, is to understand, first of all, it's a summer scene. So it's a painting that has a lot of greens, but kind of like when you're 3 or 4 years old and you take out your Crayola crayon, you've maybe got 2 or 3 green choices. As an artist, you learn green it's not only a large shade of greens, but what you put behind the green also changes the way optically we see green. So if we can, before looking at just the trees a moment, if we can look at that wedge, that second wedge down, which is the far hillside of the park, that has greens and blues in it, but if you look at it, it's a very deep blue to the left, and as you watch it, it modulates from that deep blue to a kind of a very bright, almost aqua blue kind of color, or almost turquoise in a sense. So that allows the eye to understand that this shoreline is moving away, that it's going off into the distance. When I originally painted this, the dam was much more present than I actually made it. I realized it was looking too much like an architect's rendering rather than an artist's. What helps you understand the dam is that there's a very dark spot in that base of that aqua blue color, which is kind of where the point of entry or point of exit of the trail is. So while you wouldn't necessarily know that from looking at the painting, those that know this area, know the loop trail around it, would understand that that brightness of the dam goes into a very darkness because there's a little cutout there that allows the trail head to begin if you should choose to walk around the lake in that direction. On top of that, then, we have the trees on the right. There's a lot of kind of burnt reds and deep reds intermixed in the leaves. They're not necessarily reflecting limbs. That's actually when you go out and look at a summer foliage, you're going to see, if you really kind of squint your eyes a little bit, there's all kinds of colors mixed in with that green. Deep, dark shadows of green. Oftentimes you can see little flecks of red or burnt red or cinnamon colors in it. Just as when you're around bright colored leaves, which have that lighter, brighter green, as you see towards the shore line, the sun is hitting that tree as it moves more towards the lake. So as opposed to behind the tree, where again you see really dark greens re-emerging again, that lighter shade of green has little flecks of pink in it actually, which is kind of a, red as a rich, warm color. Pink would be kind of in a very simplistic way, but it would be a watered down with more white color and would be showing more light to it. So pink to that green is kind of, to a light green, is the same as a deep cinnamon red is to a really dark green in a way. Then you even see real intense blues emerging in the leaves through there, which allows the suggestion that that shoreline is popping through again somehow. And that's how leaves work. When you're looking at leaves, there's little tiny spots. In fact, most artists, when they paint leaves, including myself, you paint a big block of color, and then you take little flecks with the tiniest brushes or with the tip of a knife, a palette knife, and you re-add those little flicks of light that are cutting through the leaves. It's easier to do that than try to paint the leaves around a light color. So you paint a mass of color, and then you start diffusing it with lighter tones that allow the light to show through and that's what makes it come alive more. It's not like when you were 4 years old and you took out your Crayola crayons and there's a brown tree trunk, there's a green, kind of ball of leaves, and then there's the blue sky behind you. So you have to learn how to manipulate all those things, whether it's with tiny brushes or with palette knives, or if you like big brush work, then that's still another process, another way of doing it. The same thing that's happening in all that foliage is happening down in the foreground. And so lots of times foregrounds are not finished by artists. I always find foregrounds among the most interesting parts, and that sort of was one thing that's a little different about my paintings than some artists, is that you see little places where there's light, it's not just one color of light. Even in a spot like that, sandy clay soil of Brown County over there, that's by the summertime is completely dried out to nothing, but almost powder. If you really look close there's a whole group of shades in there that reads within that kind of beigey color, that tannish beige color you're seeing there, as opposed to just a single shade. I'm not a plein air painter, meaning I don't go out there with my easel and paint. I tend to make some quick sketches, take some photographs. Sometimes I find a spot during the day I'm at that I think, man, I bet you in this morning or in the late evening this is great. So I make notes and I come back several times, check it out in different days. That's just what a photographer would do as well. I mean, just trying to determine because I want that. And the only advantage I maybe have is if there's a bad branch or a dead tree in the stream or something, I just don't put it in. There's all kinds of things that you photograph, that you see, that you end up removing. For anyone that's walked around a lake, Ogle Lake or some other lake, one realizes there's always all kinds of trying to get a photo of something, and there's always that, for some reason, a limb from another tree in the foreground that gets in the way. Now sometimes those limbs you keep in because they add some interest either they break up the painting a little bit, they add a foreground interest. But I'm not talking about seeing there could easily have been a limb coming in from this side. I don't recall, and plus it's always changing, but there's, the woods, they don't perfectly set themselves up for the camera or for the artist, for the photographer or the painter. In any case, they just do what they want to do. I try very little to change the topography though, or change, like a key element. There may have been a second or third little sapling among those outermost trees there. I don't, and this was done, like I said, in 2006. So now if we went back there'd be a whole other set of trees. It could be one of these bigger trees on the right has fallen down even, because they're always falling down. So saying when you went to some place and trying to go today, it's even 10 or 12 or 15 years later, things can change. But I try to keep structural elements very much, this part, the organic part, shouldn't change that much in a lifetime or two. Occasionally I've gone back and added figures into a scene where there was just no one walking in there and I really wanted a person there, so I've added a figure or something to help kind of set, not a portrait kind of figure, not that's predominant, but let's say maybe there was a person walking at the edge of the trail and I wanted that in the painting. That's the kind of thing I would add. I would get my wife or somebody to go out and just kind of see how the light hits her at that point, and then draw in a figure, whether it was male, female, whatever. I would just have some concept of scale and how the light's hitting a human form. When a painting is done, is kind of, I think it's the best answer I can give is experience, because I can tell you I've ruined some paintings over the years by working too long on them, and sometimes I don't ruin them to the point that I still show them, they maybe even still sell, but they were better before I messed with them in that extra 2 hours, And you try to go back then and say, well, wait a minute, it was better before. And you try to recapture what it was before, and now you've got a whole other set of paint on it, and it just isn't the same. Experience helps a lot in knowing that. I've known some wonderful artists over the years, some great portrait painters and some others and they've all told me the same thing. When I was just starting out, they said, no matter how hard you try, you're going to mess up some of your best paintings early on because you don't know when to stop. And I wish I could give young painters or artists an answer to that is, it's done when it's done, but you also don't know it's done until you've painted 150 to 250 paintings and messed up a few. It's kind of like in life. You don't really know when you're going to get in trouble until you get into trouble a few times, and then that's not how you got to stop doing that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of thing with this is you have to just experience will teach you. It's good, it works, and it's uniform. It's got an organic scent. Stop,
Like the bearded and bespectacled Theodore Clement Steele, dean of the first Hoosier group of artists and Indiana University's first painter-in-residence, today's artists still search for a special scene, a stream, fall's glowing colors, snow drifting, and spring blooming. Indiana's art galleries, museums, and individual collections possess their creations in ever-increasing numbers. Two of the state's biggest art shows are the annual June sale and exhibition in the Brown County Art Gallery in Nashville, free to the public and sponsored by Indiana Heritage Arts and Hoosier Salon at the Indiana State Museum in Indianapolis each fall. IHA's mission is to preserve the ever-growing collection by some of Indiana's most gifted artists. Their prize-winning paintings are on view in 3 locations listed at the end of this film. This film and others in the series explore each artist's reasons for painting that particular work and how the artist created the image. A common denominator is the artist's desire to share their love of art with others. Films, oral stories, and PowerPoint projects will be available free to any person, school, group, or organization borrowing the items. Portraying the artists in their studios and in the Indiana landscape is a way to personalize them, to make their works more understandable, to help our world around us be more accessible, and to create a desire to learn about how art is created. Our next artist, Libby Whipple, approaches the easel from a different path, but is equally eloquent about sharing her art. The IHA permanent collection can be seen at the Brown County Art Gallery, located at 1 Artist Drive in Nashville. The Brown County Community Foundation on Highway 135 North, and the lobby of the West Baden Springs Hotel in West Baden, Indiana. All are free and open to the public. View our website for hours. More information is available by emailing indianaheritagearts@gmail.com or calling 812-988-4609. IHA is a nonprofit 501c3 organization with an all-volunteer board of directors whose mission is to preserve the legacy of an art tradition begun in the 1890s in the scenery of Brown County and to broaden and encourage appreciation of art.